You put months into that garden. You watered it, you staked it, you chased pests off it at 7 in the morning, and then September shows up, and suddenly there's more food on your counter than your family can eat in a week, and you're standing there watching it slowly lose the argument with time. Most people think the hard part is growing. It isn't. Growing is actually the easy part. The hard part is knowing what to do with it after you pull it out of the ground. And if you get that part wrong, months of effort ends up in a compost bin. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which preservation method works for which food and why the two methods most people skip are probably the easiest ones available. The last one is the one most people have never tried. Stay for it. Before we get into freezing and canning, the methods everyone already knows, there's one approach that costs nothing, requires no equipment, and can keep certain crops fresh for up to 12 months. It's been around forever. Most people walk right past it because it sounds too simple to be real. It's called cold storage or cold cellaring, and the reason it doesn't come up much anymore is because there's nothing to buy. No machine, no jar, no processing, just temperature, airflow, and a dark space. Different crops want different conditions, and getting this wrong is the most common mistake. Potatoes, onions, carrots, and most root vegetables are happy around 40 degrees Fahrenheit with higher humidity. Winter squash and pumpkins want it slightly warmer, closer to 50 degrees, and significantly drier. Those aren't the same space. If you're storing both, they need to be separated, or one group is going to suffer. The most common mistake with potatoes specifically is washing them before storage. Don't. The dry coating, the original soil, that's actually working in your favor. The microbes the potato grew with help protect it. If you're buying from a store, the plastic bag is the enemy. It traps moisture against the skin and starts the rot. Take them out of the bag the day you get home. Lay them out in dry air for a full day, then layer them in a cardboard box with dry soil. Not wet soil, dry, between each layer. Close it up, find a cool, dark spot, and don't overthink it. That process can keep store-bought potatoes viable for up to a year. Onions and garlic need a curing step first. After harvest, lay them out in the sun for several days to let the outer skin dry and harden before you move them to crates. That dry outer layer is what protects them in storage. Skip the curing step and the shelf life drops significantly. The one thing that kills cold storage faster than anything else is moisture. Not cold, moisture. A basement that stays slightly damp year-round is not a storage space for root vegetables. A garage that gets humid in summer is not either. Before you put anything into storage, think about where the moisture risk comes from. Dry air, cool temperature, no light. Those three things are the whole system. If this is already more useful than what you expected, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more coming in this one. Freezing looks foolproof. It mostly is, except for one step that most people skip. Get it wrong, and your harvest comes out of the freezer in 3 months looking and tasting like something from the back of a gas station. Get it right, and it can last a full year. The step is blanching. Before you freeze most vegetables, you briefly submerge them in boiling water, usually around a minute, then cool them down fast in an ice bath and freeze. The reason is enzymes. Vegetables contain natural enzymes that don't stop working just because the temperature drops. Over time, those enzymes quietly break down texture, color, and flavor, even in the freezer. Blanching stops that process before it starts. Beans, peas, broccoli, corn, all of these need blanching. Most herbs don't and can be frozen directly. Some fruits don't either. Berries, for example, freeze beautifully without any prep beyond washing and drying them thoroughly first. And some things simply shouldn't be frozen at all. Cucumbers turn to mush, lettuce becomes something between wet paper and regret. Tomatoes lose their texture completely, though frozen tomatoes are actually fine for cooked applications like soups and sauces, since the texture doesn't matter there. If you'd miss the crunch, don't freeze it. For everything that does freeze well, the container matters more than most people realize. A regular zip bag works, but the food is in constant contact with air, and air causes freezer burn over months. A vacuum-sealed bag removes that air entirely, and the difference in quality after 6 or 8 months is significant. If you're freezing a large portion of your harvest, the equipment pays for itself quickly in what you don't lose. One habit worth building early: portion before you freeze. Think about how you actually cook. If you typically need a cup of beans at a time, freeze a cup at a time, not a massive block of beans that you then have to chisel apart every time you want some. That sounds obvious, but it's the kind of thing that only feels annoying after you've done it wrong for a season. The other thing worth knowing: label everything with the date. Freezer amnesia is real, and mystery bag from last fall is not the vibe you're going for in February. Canning has been done reliably for over 100 years. It's effective, it's shelf-stable, and done right, it can last well over a year without refrigeration. It's also the one method where getting the process wrong isn't just a ruined batch. There's a line you need to understand before you start. That line divides high-acid foods from low-acid foods. It determines which canning method is safe, and it is not a guideline, it's a hard rule. High-acid foods, tomatoes, pickles, most fruits, jams, and jellies, can be processed in a water bath canner. You submerge the filled jars in boiling water for the required time, and the combination of acid and heat produces a sealed, shelf-stable result. It's genuinely accessible for beginners. If you've got tomatoes and a large pot, you can start here. Low-acid foods, beans, corn, most other vegetables, meat, cannot be processed this way. Boiling water only reaches 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not enough temperature to destroy the spores responsible for the most serious foodborne illness you can get from home-preserved food. For low-acid foods, you need a pressure canner, which drives the temperature up to 240 degrees. That's the level that actually handles the risk. The reason this matters so much is that when low-acid food is processed incorrectly, there are no obvious signs. The jar seals fine, it looks normal, it smells normal. You would not know. So the rule isn't negotiable. High acid to water bath, low acid to pressure canner. One follows from the other. Pickling fits within this section and is worth separating out clearly. Vinegar pickling creates a high-acid environment, which makes water bath canning viable for the finished product. Lacto-fermentation is a completely different process. Salt draws out moisture, lactic acid bacteria do the work, and the pH drops over time without any heat involved. Both produce preserved food. The results taste nothing alike. Fermented pickles have more depth and complexity. Vinegar pickles are more familiar and consistent. There's no wrong answer. They're just different methods for different outcomes. The practical takeaway from canning is that once you have the jars on the shelf, you have real food security. A shelf of properly canned tomatoes, pickles, and jam in October is not nothing. It's months of meals. Drying is one of the oldest preservation methods there is. It's also one of the most misunderstood because there are 3 very different ways to do it, and which one you choose determines whether your food lasts a few weeks, several months, or genuinely the next 2 decades. The simplest version is air drying, and it does exactly what the name suggests. Harvest herbs, sage, thyme, mint, dill, basil, hang them or lay them on a screen with good airflow and leave them until the moisture is completely gone. No electricity, no equipment, no cost beyond patience. The result goes into a sealed jar and holds its flavor well for months. For herbs, this method is hard to beat. It's also the reason that a jar of dried thyme you grew yourself tastes noticeably better than the one from the store shelf. For other crops, root vegetables, fruits, mushrooms, a dehydrator does a more consistent job. It circulates warm air at a controlled temperature, removing moisture evenly across trays. Dehydrated mushrooms reconstitute well and taste great in cooked dishes. Dehydrated fruit becomes its own snack. Root vegetables shrink dramatically but store well in airtight containers for many months. The investment in a basic dehydrator opens up a lot of options, particularly for harvests too large to freeze or process quickly. Then there's freeze drying, which operates on a fundamentally different principle. The food is frozen solid, then the dryer slowly draws the ice out as vapor, skipping the liquid stage entirely through a process called sublimation. The result is food with almost no remaining moisture. Properly freeze-dried food stored in airtight, sealed containers can last 20 to 25 years without meaningful degradation. The machine itself is expensive. That's the honest answer. But for anyone serious about genuinely long-term food storage, nothing else gets close to those numbers. And unlike dehydrated food, freeze-dried produce reconstitutes with water back to something very close to its original texture and flavor, which makes it far more versatile. The practical guidance on matching method to crop: air dry your herbs, dehydrate your fruits and most vegetables, and if you're freeze-drying, prioritize the things that matter most to you long-term. Not everything needs to last 2 decades. Long before refrigerators, before canning, before any modern equipment, people kept food edible through entire winters using 2 things they already had around them: salt and time. Those methods still work exactly as well today, and there are a few versions of them that most people have never tried. Fermentation is getting a lot of attention, and the attention is deserved. The process is simpler than most people expect. Pack vegetables in salt or submerge them in a salt brine, and the salt creates conditions where lactic acid bacteria thrive. That bacteria produces lactic acid, drops the pH, and the food is preserved without heat, without vinegar, and without any specialized equipment beyond a jar. Cabbage becomes sauerkraut. Cucumbers become real fermented pickles, not the vinegar variety, something deeper. Peppers, carrots, green beans, almost anything can come out of a jar months later, transformed. The flavor that fermentation produces is different from anything you get through other preservation methods. It has complexity, depth, something alive in it, and unlike most preservation methods, the food you end up with is arguably more nutritious than when you started. The fermentation process creates beneficial bacteria that survive into the finished product. Salt brining, the older and less fashionable cousin, works differently. You're not creating fermentation, you're relying on the salt itself to suppress bacterial growth. The concentration is high enough to keep the food viable for months. The result needs soaking before use because the salt content is significant, but the method requires almost no skill and almost no equipment, which made it practical for centuries and still makes it practical now. One more method that almost nobody thinks of as preservation: infusion. Take fresh herbs or citrus or garlic and submerge them in oil or vinegar for days or weeks. You're not preserving the plant material itself, you're pulling the flavor out into a liquid that holds it. The infused oil or vinegar stores well and makes everything you cook with it noticeably better. It's one of those things that feels like a disproportionate reward for very little effort. What are you planning to try first? Or what have you already been using that you think more people should know about? Drop it in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. The algorithm's already picked your next video. Based on what you just watched, it's probably not far off.